to the break. But me, you're me, Louie T. Welcome to this LouieTeeNetwork exclusive limited series, The Reign of Terror, as we chronicle the 23 years of hell that former Washington Redskins football team and Commanders owner Daniel Snyder put this fan base through. We've gone through the first 2 seasons of Daniel Snyder's Reign of Terror, 99, 2000. Now we find ourselves chapter 3, 2001, the Marty Schottenheimer year. Now, this year was really telling. And I think this was the year where people really started to take notice that, no, this isn't this rambunctious, spunky, energetic owner who's willing to go to great lengths to win. People started to realize this guy's a little off, and he's controlling, and he's exactly what they don't need if they look to be successful anytime in the near future. He's impulsive. What we would later find out, he's a predator of sorts. He's not a good dude at all, but we still didn't know these things. However, Marty Schottenheimer, I think, knew a little something. And I think Marty knew before any of us did about the darkness and the years that were coming down the pipeline. I think Marty might have knew before all of us did. And he knew what was on the horizon. And unfortunately, this 2001 season was sort of a foreshadowing of many morbid years to come. So it started with Daniel Snyder wanting to prove to everyone that he was a real NFL owner and that he could build a winner. So after firing Norv Turner, after his second year as owner of the Washington Redskins, he wanted to prove to everyone that he had football chops. He had acumen. He could find a guy that could help him turn this thing around quickly. And so he sought the help of a guy that had won and won big everywhere he had been, in Marty Schottenheimer, who had retired from the Kansas City Chiefs 2 years previous, was working for ESPN as an analyst, and wanted to get back into coaching. Now, Marty had already said, I could never work for an owner like Daniel Snyder. Again, Marty knew what we would later find out down the line about, Daniel Snyder. He could see it a mile away. This guy's controlling. He's domineering. He wants to have his fingerprints over everything. I could never work for an owner like that. Those were Marty Schottenheimer's words. Obviously, Marty wanted back in the game. He saw the Washington Redskins as an organization that had an opportunity to give him that. And he thought that the football team was really solid because, as you know, if you know anything about Marty Schottenheimer, he's a ground and pound demon. That's his thing. He wants to play physical football, quality defense, run the ball, and beat you 13-10. That was Marty Ball, right? We've heard that phrase a million times, Marty Ball. That was Marty Ball in its true essence and form. So Washington was built for that. The defense was quality. Stephen Davis was one of the better running backs in the league at that time. The offensive line was really solid. They had built it. If you recall, Chris Samuels in 2000, John Jansen in 99. Trey Johnson was one of the best guards in football at the time. So this was a really good offensive line. The problem was when you get an owner like Daniel Snyder, who had come in the year before and spent all of this money frivolously, now you've got salary cap issues. So you look up, and the first thing that Marty Schottenheimer had to do when he got here, because let me go back just a bit. Marty also was smart enough to make sure that his title wasn't just as head coach, but it was also director of player personnel. So what that allowed Marty to do was essentially make all the football decisions. And one of the first things Marty did when he got in the building was he cleaned house. He got rid of Vinny Serrato, Dan's right-hand man. he pretty much told Dan Snyder, all right, I got this from here. You take your monkey ass over there and be the owner, and I'm going to handle all the football shit. Fred Drasner and all the other minority shareholders, you get your ass out of here too. All right. Took parking spots from all of their asses, cleared the building out, and said, I got all the football shit. You guys know nothing about this. You're peons. You got your fingerprints all over it last year and you effed it up. I got it from here, fellas. And so immediately Dan was taken out of the picture and he wasn't allowed to have fun. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that later. Now, you fast forward to, Marty coming in. The salary cap's a mess because of what Dan had done the year before. Signing all of these guys to these huge deals, players that weren't even here still being paid money. It was a mess, right? Obviously. So he came in and he had to either release players or he had to allow guys that he probably would have liked to have re-signed leave in free agency, like a James Thrash, for instance. That's a core special teamer, a guy that would do anything. He was a Marty Schottenheimer type of player, but couldn't afford it, right? So Larry Sinners, another guy that was fantastic. I talked about Larry Sinners on the 1999 show. We don't win the NFC East without Larry Sinners. He was an integral part of what we did in both 99 and 2000, but specifically 99. They let Larry Sinners go. He goes to Buffalo that next year and is a Pro Bowler, right? So tough choices had to be made, okay? So Marty comes in, makes all of these changes. One of the ones that he doesn't make is Jeff George at quarterback. I don't think he was a fan of Jeff George. None of us were. Jeff George was the second coming of Jay Schroeder, for those of you who, lived through that. Jeff George was selfish. He was immature. He was a cancer in a locker room, and Marty knew it, but Marty really didn't have any other recourse. He was under contract. He did, they brought in Tony Banks at training camp, but, Jeff George was going to be the quarterback. And that probably came from above, from Daniel Snyder, like, hey, I want Jeff George to be the starting quarterback. But Marty couldn't stand him. Anyway, so that's how everything kind of started. And there was a little animosity when Marty got there. Understand that Marty's a hard ass, okay? And so, Marty had a very rigorous and physical training camp. And this was back in the days of two-a-days, Oklahoma drills Marty was bringing out. These veterans, Bruce Smith's 800 years old. He's like, I'm not doing this shit. Darryl Green's like, bro, I'm 99 years old. You really think I'm out here trying to have two-a-days and be physical and practice in Oklahoma drills? What do you think this is? So all the veterans kind of pushed back. They were not happy. It was so bad, Darryl Green said, hey, this is my last year. I'm retiring after this year. Now, after Marty was let go, Darryl Green decided, oh, he's gone. I'll be back for next year, right? But it was a tough camp, and Marty was hard on these players. But another thing that was a little bit divisive early on with Marty coming in was Ray Rhodes was here as the defensive coordinator. And a lot of the players loved Ray Rhodes and wanted to see him not only be kept on as the defensive coordinator, they wanted to see Ray Rhodes get an opportunity to be the head coach here. Unfortunately, Ray Rhodes was passed over for Marty Schottenheimer, and Rhodes was not happy, and he wasn't going to stay here under any circumstances. He wanted out, so he was gone. And so, that was a little disappointing, but that's nor here nor there. The bottom line was Marty came in, and he was going to do it his way. He gave his son, a couple of his sons, jobs. One is a defensive coordinator. I think another one was like offensive coordinator or quarterbacks coach, something to that effect. So people felt some type of way about that, nepotism and all of that good stuff. But one of the most important things Marty did was he cleaned out the front office, as I mentioned at the top of this thing, and he brought in John Schneider, who we all know now is the guru behind the Seattle Seahawks in their front office as their general manager. Well, he was in Washington with Marty Schottenheimer, and who knows what that could have turned into if Marty would have just been given the latitude to do what he needed to do, and be here longer than just 1 year. But that's nor here nor there. So the season kicks off, and boy, is it ugly. I mean, week 1, the first 3 weeks, Washington was outscored by over 100 points. I'm not bullshitting you, okay? It couldn't have started any worse. All right, the first game of the season, I think we went to San Diego and we got our doors blown off by the San Diego Chargers. And then week 2 was supposed to be the Arizona Cardinals, if you recall, but it was 9/11 that happened. And so no football games were played in week 2 that year. And so they took that week 2 game and they moved it all the way to the back of the season. But we come back from the little reprieve from 9/11 and we get our asses kicked even worse by the Green Bay Packers. And at this point, I'm thinking, golly, you'd heard all the stuff about training camp and all of the veterans pushing back and how tough training camp was. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe Marty wasn't the right guy for the job, The next week wasn't that much better. Another ass kicking. I think this was the Chiefs this time. It was bad, man. I mean, and we weren't close in any of these games. But after that second ass whooping against Green Bay, Marty had seen enough with Jeff George. And he told Jeff George, get your shit and get out. Like, cut him. You don't ever see that in the NFL. You might demote a player. It's rare that you just see a coach take a starting quarterback, not just any player. You could cut a left guard, right, and just insert another one. He cut the starting quarterback 2 weeks into the season, okay? Get your shit and get out. And Jeff George was an ass. I mean, an ass, the king of asses at the quarterback position. He's like the worst teammate you could possibly have. One of the worst guys you could have in the locker room. He just, the epitome of selfish. So, Marty had seen enough. George was playing in his normal, typical way, turning the football over, erratic, woe is me. And so, got rid of him. Tony Banks is in. Banks just got there probably a month and a half ago, 2 months maybe. So, not much you can do with Tony Banks, right? So, the next game wasn't that much better. Kansas City kicked our ass as well. And so, you're 0-3. You lose again after that to Dallas, who stunk as well, which, you start the season 0-5. Let's just go there. But it should have been 1-4 because that 5th loss was to Dallas on a Monday night. And, oh my God. So, my dad is a Cowboys fan, and we had rituals. We would watch these games together. This was a Monday night game, which was pretty prevalent back in the day. Dallas and Washington on a Monday night. Every year you had one of those games, it seemed like. Anyway, the universal language between me and my dad for the game is over, I'm going upstairs, good night, was handing over the remote. So whomever got to the TV first was in control of the remote. So if the game went on commercial, the person in control of the remote could either decide to keep the TV where it is and just watch the commercials, or you could flip, and those were the days where there wasn't, all of these different options to get you the channels very quickly. You had one button, the back button, all right? You could go back to the previous channel, or you could just manually flip through the channels, or you could hit the exact number of the channel that you wanted to watch. So I was too lazy in those days. I wasn't doing all that. Either I was going to the back button or we were just going to watch the commercials. My dad can't stand commercials. So if he had control of the remote, we're all over the place until the game comes back on. Anyway, whomever had control of the remote would have it for the duration of the game. Sometimes, and here was the problem, sometimes when you start going all around the world during the commercial break, you run into something that's really interesting, you lose track of how long you've been gone and you might miss a play. Or you might miss, a guy got injured and they're giving us a sideline report And now we didn't hear it because you were somewhere else, watching a basketball game. Whatever the case may be, we had Dallas dead to rights. This was one of the worst games I've ever watched. To this day, it is still one of the worst Cowboys-Redskins games I've ever watched in my life. This thing is 7-6, late in the fourth quarter. We're up, and we've got this thing in control. And I know it sounds crazy because it's 7-6, but it's 7-6 for a reason. Both of these teams stink offensively, okay? The Cowboys starting quarterback at the time is, what is this? Anthony, oh my God. Why can't I think of his name? He was so terrible. Anthony something. I can't think of his name. He was horrible. And they were bad. The Cowboys were bad. There was no more Michael Irvin. Obviously, Troy Aikman had already retired. LeVar had taken him out in his rookie season. It was just Emmitt Smith. And Anthony Wright, that's his name. Anthony Wright. He was trash. And we still couldn't beat the damn Cowboys. So, this thing was over, man. 7-6. We're at the Cowboys. We're on the Cowboys side of the field. We're already in field goal range. Don't even need a field goal. One first down and this thing's probably over. It's 3rd and 1, right? 3rd or 4th and 1. We got one of the best running backs in the league in Stephen Davis. This thing is over. So, it's 3rd down and my dad gets up. He hands me the remote. And that's him waving the white flag. And my dad isn't one that gives up very easily. And so when he gives up the remote, there's this sense of relief that comes over me like, hi, we got this thing, And he goes into the kitchen to get him a final drink of water before he heads up. And he hear, Davis fumbles the ball. Al Michaels, that beautiful, lush voice. Davis fumbles the ball. And my dad turns back around and he reaches for the remote. Hey, hand that thing back over here, buddy. And I'm like, nope, you're not getting it back. He sits down and I proceed to watch Anthony Wright and Emmitt Smith take the Cowboys down the field in the field goal range for a walk-off 9-7 field goal and win. It was one of the most debilitating losses against the Cowboys at that time for me as a fan, and I've been through a lot of them. Still to this day, it ranks up pretty high as one of the ones where you just go, how in the hell did that shit happen? Anyway, we should have won that game and been 1-4. Instead, the Cowboys, who were winless at the time, just like we were, both of us were 0-4. We both stunk. They were 1-4 and we were 0-5. And this season is going nowhere fast. Then the game that turned the entire season around happened, and that was the Carolina Panthers game. That game was odd because we were getting our asses kicked again. It's 14-0, with about 11, 12 minutes, maybe 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And they're marching it down the field again to get more points. And Chris Winkie, if you recall, was their starting quarterback, and he sucked ass. He was really good at Florida State. Drafted him, relatively high, and he stunk. And I think he had already thrown like 2 interceptions in that game, whatever the case may be. I don't know why they were throwing it. We couldn't stop Tim Biakabatuka. It didn't matter what. You remember I told you Tim Biakabatuka shredded us back in '99 when we came back and beat him? Well, that same Tim Biakabatuka was still on the Carolina Panthers, and he was still kicking our ass. And for some reason, just like in '99, they stopped giving him the football. I'll never understand it, but hey, I'm not complaining. It helped us win that game, and it ultimately helped us come back and win this one. So we're down 14-0. And Tim Biakabatuka is killing us on this particular drive and killing us in the game overall, like he always does. And they stopped giving him the ball. Instead, they give it to Chris Winkie, and he throws the ball into the flats to his fullback too damn high because Chris Winkie stunk and his accuracy was trash. And it skips off of his fullback's hands right into the waiting arms of LeVar Arrington streaking down the sideline, who scores on like a 67-yard interception for a touchdown, pick six. He makes that residence call. And from that point on, the game turned. Washington scored 17 unanswered points, including a field goal, the game winner in overtime, and beat the Panthers 17-14 in a game that Rod Gardner, our rookie receiver. So if you recall, in that 2001 season, Rod Gardner out of Clemson was our first round pick. Fred Smoot out of Mississippi State was our second round pick. So another one of those drafts where we were hitting on some young guys early on. Now, Gardner would be later known as 50-50 because you didn't know if he was going to catch it. It was a 50-50 chance he was going to catch it or drop it. You didn't know, right? So that was his nickname, 50-50. But in that game against Carolina, he was 100-100, okay? Or just 100, catching it, right? Caught everything. Over 200 yards receiving for him, including the game-tying touchdown, and then a big catch in overtime to set up the game-winning field goal. So Gardner was fantastic in that game. Anyway, we win that game and come from behind fashion, get our first win of the season. It let LeVar Arrington pick literally change the fortunes of that season. Arrington was starting to come into his own at that point. He was really turning into a force to be reckoned with under Marty's leadership. And you could see him starting to spread his wings. LeVar Arrington had three career interceptions. All three of them came in that Marty Schottenheimer season, including that pick six that turned the season around. We then run off 5 straight victories. After starting 0-5, we're now 5-5. We lose to the Cowboys again with Anthony Wright, which is like, God damn, what the hell, man? But then we beat the Arizona Cardinals. Thank God for the Arizona Cardinals, right? So we're back to 500 at 6-6. And then we're right in the thick of things in the playoff chase as well. We lose to the Eagles, and then I'll never forget this game. This is another memorable one. So the Cowboys game, the Panthers game, and then this game against the Bears was the one that pretty much ended our season. And it was a painful one because we're winning this game, right? I think the score at the time was like 13-9, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. And the Bears are attempting a field goal. It's 13-10 or something like that. I think it was 13-10. And they do a fake field goal, and the holder throws the ball to Brian Urlacher, who scores a touchdown. And it caught everybody, including myself, off guard. I'm like, what? Brian Urlacher? What? They went on to beat us. I think it was like 20-13, or 20 to. I think they took a safety at the end of the game, because we got all the way down there to try to tie the game up. It's 20-13. We get all the way down inside their 5-yard line, somewhere like the 2, 3, 4, something like that. Maybe it was a 5. I don't know. And we can't get in. And so, because they were so backed up, I think they took a knee. Instead of punting us the ball back, they took a knee, gave us the 2 points, and then had the kickoff, which put us way back down there, and then they won the game 20-15. But that Urlacher fake field goal was like a slap in the face. Like, damn, that hurt. Not Urlacher. And that dropped us to 6-8 on the season, and that pretty much sealed our fate. You know, we won the last 2 games of the season, but it didn't matter. We were 8-8 and we missed the playoffs. But, you know, all the old Redskins fans were saying at the end of that season, this is like Gibbs all over again. You remember Gibbs' first season, he comes over from the Chargers, he starts 0-5, turns it around, and the next year, we're in the Super Bowl. you know. And so all the old Redskins fans are hyping people like myself up, like, yo, Marty's gonna, and everywhere Marty had been, he won. And not just win, he won big. Okay? He went to the playoffs all 4 years in Cleveland, including 3 AFC championship games. Unfortunately, he met John Elway almost every single time he made it. Or it might have been 2 AFC championship games and lost to Elway both times. Whatever the case may be. He went to Kansas City, went to the playoffs 7 out of 10 years there. Marty knew how to win. He just didn't know how to win in the playoffs. That was the knock on Marty Schottenheimer. And that's where the Marty's butthole would get really tight during the playoffs. He gets super conservative. He was already a conservative coach by nature, but he'd get even more conservative in the playoffs. And it would also, and he had some really bad luck. Ernest Biner in the fumble, you know, when he's with the Chargers later on in his career, they get a pick off of Brady that's going to advance them to the AFC Championship game, and they would have won the AFC Champion. They would have went to the Super Bowl that year, I truly believe, because the team that they ended up playing in the AFC Championship, I think it was Phillip Rivers, or not Phillip Rivers. I forget who it was, but I think they would have won. The Chargers were the best team that year in football. LaDainian Tomlinson was the MVP. They would have won, I feel like. But instead of going down, the dummy tries to run it back, and Troy Brown takes the ball from him. Like, he had the worst luck in the playoffs as well. But some of it was him just being too uptight as a coach and being too conservative. That said, Washington fans were over the moon for Marty Schottenheimer. I know, I can tell you after the first couple of weeks, I was like, I think we made a mistake. This isn't the Marty that I saw in Kansas City. That's all I knew. I didn't know Cleveland Marty. I was too young for that. But I knew Kansas City Marty, and all Kansas City Marty did was win. Right? I'm like, this isn't the same guy. That little time off at ESPN, he's not the same guy. And by season's end, I changed my tune. I mean, this guy was winning with Kent Graham and Tony Banks. Do you know how hard it is to do in the NFL? To win games with Tony Banks and Kent Graham as your starting quarterback? And the running joke was Tony Banks and 1 audible. That was what he was winning with, right? I mean, the job that he did in 2001 was masterful. It was masterful. We were not a talented football team on the offensive side of the football. You know, the one thing that we did have was you still have Michael Westbrook. You drafted Rod Gardner, but neither one of those guys were world beaters, okay? The rest of your receiving core was pretty much trash. I remember Darnarian McCants was a guy we also drafted in 2001, along with Smoot and Rod Gardner. And I just remember him being so damn tall, I would use him on Madden to go get jump balls because he was so damn big. But we didn't have really any receivers. Tight end wasn't all that talented. Steven Alexander got injured again that year in 2001. So it was just Stephen Davis, really. That's all we had. And he rode the shit out of Stephen Davis. 300 and some odd carries, another 1,400-yard season. As a matter of fact, Stephen Davis eclipsed the 1,405 yards, which was a franchise record that he set in 99 in 2001 under Marty. 1,432 yards rushing, which set a new franchise record for most yards in a single season by a Redskins running back. So that's all we had was Stephen Davis. And somehow we won 8 games. It was mystifying. And I said, and with all the old school Redskins fans in my ear telling me that Marty's the guy and this is Gibbs all over again, this is Gibbs 2.0. Remember, we hadn't gotten to Gibbs 2.0, so this was Gibbs 2.0 for everybody else. I started to believe that, and I'm like, hell yeah. Hell yes. Let's see what Marty does for an encore. And before we could even get the chance, Daniel Snyder has a week-long meeting with Marty Schottenheimer, who does not back down. Daniel Snyder wants control of his football team. Marty's kicked everybody out. You know, Dan's not allowed to make any stupid-ass decisions. Marty's like, nah, I got this. Me and John Schneider, we got this shit. bad back, right? And Dan's like, no, 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 no. I want to bring in a general manager, which was a lie. You know, we heard all these names, Ron Wolf and guys that were supposed to be prominent names. Even a younger Bruce Allen was even in the mix. Reportedly, supposedly, in those days. That was a lie. It was just a front for Dan to get back into the building, get his cronies back into the building, including Vinny Serrato, and for them to have some fun. You know, go out here and play fantasy football. And Marty wasn't having that shit. And so they fired him. And what did Dan do? Of course. What else would he do? Go get Steve Spurrier, a guy who, the old ball coach. Not very good. Not very good. Steve doesn't give a shit what Dan does. You can do whatever the hell you want to do. Steve just wants to show up. Meeting starts at 8. Steve wants to show up at 7:58. Practice is over at 3. Steve wants to be on the golf course at 3:05. Okay? Right? Like, Steve Spurrier wanted nothing to do other than coach football, and then you can handle the rest of the shit. That's exactly what Dan wanted. He wanted to be in control. So he got rid of Marty. The guy that was going to turn this thing around and turn us back into a winner. It's the single biggest mistake of the Daniel Snyder era. And Marty knew what Daniel Snyder was, which is why he kicked everybody out of the building and told Dan, I got this. Unfortunately, we didn't know, but we were about to find out. And that's where we leave off. As we head into 2002 and the arrival of the old ball coach. Things are about to get really interesting. But I'll see you guys next time on the Reign of Terror. Shit's about to get real. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.